Conservancy. She's talking about recreational fishing data collection architecture.
All right. Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name's Catherine Bruger. I'm a manager of fish conservation for Ocean Conservancy. We are an environmental pro-fishing nonprofit. We've been working in the United States and internationally for 40 years, looking for science-based solutions for both fish and fishing communities. Just a little bit of background about me. I've been working in fisheries governance for 20 years. I've worked with the states, federal government, and research. And I've been with Ocean Conservancy now for 7 years. My focus has been primarily on recreational fisheries, data collection, and looking for fisheries policy solutions in the southeastern US. And just as the fishing industry is often multi-generational, I'm a second-generation fishery biologist. My dad is pictured here, who was a fishery biologist before me. He studied recreationally significant stocks, snook, bonefish, and tarpon. And in the 1980s, he appeared before the state legislature when snook populations were in severe decline and testified, and it led to the first ever recreational fisheries closure in the state. Also, my uncle is pictured here. He was an avid recreational angler whose catch was often featured in local newspapers. And my husband was a fisheries observer on commercial fishing boats for over 10 years, and he's logged over 3 years at sea. And then I'm raising my children to also be tiny little anglers. So a bit about the geography. I'm a fourth generation Florida resident. The area that I'm located in is in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I'm central to the two geographies that I primarily engage with, the Gulf and the South Atlantic here in the United States. And those are the regions with the greatest impact from unrestricted recreational fishing access, where there's increasing populations in the coastal areas, and data collection issues are challenging both accountability of the management systems as well as angler trust in those data collection systems. So because of the scale, it's really necessary to integrate recreational data into stock assessments. And also there were talks this morning that talked about the General Recreational Survey that's been in place since the 1980s, and it produces a long time series of data that's highly valuable. Some of the emphasis this morning in the talks was the importance of collecting this type of data for having that long time series of trends so that we can understand how catch and effort shifts over time, and so that we can understand spatial distributions of fisheries, and also giving us an ability to predict future catch of our fisheries. So this data stream that I'm mentioning really serves as a foundational starting place for recreational fishing data in the US. And that brings me to the focus of the talk, which is what we're calling a recreational fishing data collection architecture plan. And essentially what we've done is synthesized a roadmap or a framework to solve some of the challenges for one of the most complicated models. And then our intention is also to provide potential clear entry points for other future data collection programs. So to develop this, as I mentioned, we started with looking at the lens of one of the most data-rich and complicated models in the US, and that's red snapper. And as I mentioned, it's a very complex model. It's managed throughout the southeastern US as two distinct stocks, one in the Gulf and one in the South Atlantic. Both of these stocks are experiencing what we call a rebuilding paradox. And that means that both stocks have been chronically overfished, have previously undergone overfishing, but they're rebuilding. However, the majority of the fish that are being caught are primarily young and less fecund. Therefore, conservation measures remain strict so that we can support a sufficient age structure. And because abundance is increasing, anglers are catching more fish. However, seasons remain short and strict, and therefore out-of-season discards increased or are continuing to increase, and this has led to increased social mistrust in the data. So the concept of more fish in the ocean but shorter seasons is kind of counterintuitive, and it reached a turning point about 8 years ago when the federal season was reduced to just 3 days. It actually led to protests, and management was then really shifted from federal to state authority. And essentially what you see here on the left was that management for that regional stock was broken up into different sectors or different segments for each of the states to manage independently. And part of what that meant was that each of the states developed complementary surveys or more fine-scale resolution niche surveys that were aimed at helping to supplement the data that was available and provide information for each of their specific regional geographies that's tailored to those anglers. And so, as you might expect, part of what this created was a challenge among the consistency of these surveys. While each of the surveys collects information of catch and effort, they each have their own unique biases, and therefore they can't be directly compared among each other. And this was a well-documented challenge, and because there wasn't a calibration methodology in place, it actually led to overfishing occurring in 2019. And then the second challenge that we have related to this is that the public can't access any of the landings data for red snapper in a comprehensive location since 2018. That's a really major transparency issue for the most heavily researched, funded, and sought after stock in the region. And this has really obscured the process for regional population assessments. And that also in turn fuels the more concerning issue, which is tracking the conservation of the stock. So the figures that you see here on the left are from the most recent reports from the states. And you can see that for 4 out of the 5 states, they're reporting declining trends in size. Meanwhile, fishermen are also reporting having to travel further to catch red snapper, and this is all summing together to suggest that maybe this model of management hasn't delivered successful conservation outcomes for the stock. So despite all of these challenges, this model of authority and resolution has released a political pressure valve, and generally in the public lens, this model has been considered a success. And it's also being considered by other regions, other sectors, and for other stocks. I'll also mention that there's tremendous interest in developing new survey methods and coming up with new ways to collect the information. And those are really important, and we need those. So I'm trying to emphasize that we also need that to happen at the same time. But we also need to look at how to reform the entire data collection system as a whole, with an emphasis on improved outcomes and what the outcomes will look like. And there's several metrics that we can use to determine if the outcomes have been improved. Some of those things are the precision of catch and effort estimates getting better? Are we delivering the data in a faster timeline? And are we achieving higher sampling rates at a reduced cost to both taxpayers and license holders? So what does this reformed data collection vision look like? And it's really kind of the outcome that we all want to see. Ultimately, what we want to see is that recreational fishing data is precise, trusted, and transparent. And we want all of these data streams to come together to better inform our understanding of the stock as a whole, to support healthy and abundant stocks. So our intention with this vision was twofold. We wanted to, 1, find a way to fix the red snapper system, and then 2, use this as a model for other data streams. So to get to that, we started with a literature review and systemic analysis of all of the components that exist within this management framework. We looked at both federal and regional policies. We also reviewed the existing partnerships that exist from the states, commissions, data centers, and federal partners. And then we also looked at a management framework in place on the West Coast. And then we reviewed the existing data standards, which are a single set of shared guidelines for recreational fisheries data collection that promote data quality, consistency, comparability, and ultimately transparency. And I will mention and note here that these data standards that exist are specifically for probabilistic surveys and sampling methods. And then last, we did a review on the incentives. Primarily, there's 2. One is that if you adhere to some of the procedures that already exist, there's the opportunity to gain additional funding. And then second, as data providers, there's a huge incentive to have your data actually included in the science and management process. So within each of these categories, there's a lot of opportunity to reform the system. And so we looked at can we group these components together to improve the recreational data collection system as a whole? And essentially what we did here was define objectives for each of these 4 components, the rationale for its need, the responsibilities, and then recommendations. And largely what we found is that among all of the things that are out there, the components exist, they just lack cohesion and sequencing. So I'll walk you through all of the elements that we defined. The first is compiling and sharing the data. And the first step for solving the crisis with red snapper data right now is really we need to know what the data is and bring it all together. So as you can see and as is visualized here is that the data streams are pretty fractured and the data flow is currently pretty dysfunctional. So our first overarching goal is really superficially basic. Just bring these data streams together in a central location. Let's try to see all of the data and then let's make it accessible to the public using data queries and having tools that are available so that anyone can access the data. I'm also pleased to report that this process is in progress right now. The Gulf States Commission is developing this data warehouse, so we're on track to developing this. The second element involves understanding the data and then making it usable, and that has 2 components. The first is in the short term, developing that calibration like I mentioned, so that the data can be compared and used for in-season management. And then the second part of this objective is to develop processes that enable long-term integration. And that means finding ways to bring all of the survey pieces together, including complementary data sources. One of the problems that we're continuing to see in the Gulf is that some of the supplementary data streams are being pitted against the existing long-term data series in terms of data replacement rather than integration. So the third element that I'm talking about also has 2 parts. One is having data standards, and then the second is actually adherence to the data standards. And what I'm showing on the left is a scorecard that we developed, and I'll walk you through that. So walking through the standards very briefly that were developed, they're really looking at a broad resolution. There's 2 categories of the data standards. The first is performance standards, and those are focused on ensuring statistical rigor, comparability, and transparency. That really has to do with documenting the survey plan, the survey design, undergoing peer review, and developing annual reports. And then the second group are technical specifics, and those are essentially elements that you would collect in data fields, like the number of fish caught or the number of fish released. And then the other part of that is also developing estimates of uncertainty. And so for a complex system to function coherently, we want both of these processes, both types of standards, essentially. And the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Mathematics just released a peer review of these data standards and largely deemed them appropriate for use and made some recommendations for minor revisions and suggestions to enhance them to better incorporate them in management. And so to better understand how each of the Gulf states stack up against adherence to these standards, this is the checklist that we developed. And I'm really going to kind of skim over this, but as you can see, they're largely sequential, and about halfway through, most of the states fall off the adherence, and you can see that in red, where we don't know if the states are adhering to that or if they're not actually reaching that level of adherence. So while many of the Gulf states have committed to these standards, achieving them is still ambitious. And without achieving these, we can't make comparisons between legacy methods and new methods. And part of that is that many of these don't produce uncertainties or precision. So it's becoming a major challenge. And the success of new data collection programs really hinges on not just having data standards, but on also achieving them. So the final element is that the data system includes accountability metrics and periodic reviews and processes for data quality modifications. And that includes tracking performance elements and performance indicators. So next steps for red snapper, looking at our case study, data collection still in various stages of these elements, but even after 8 years, there are a lot of holes. And while none of these elements have been easy, it's still something that has to be considered as this model of management is being considered for other stocks in other regions. So just to wrap things up, we believe that there are applications of this model that could apply to data collection systems that consider multiple data streams for any recreational management application, and our model highlights an emphasis on improving the outcomes of a system. Ultimately, we want to see all of the data streams coming together and emphasize that we want to have sustainable catch in the long term and ensuring those conservation outcomes. And all of these components, we believe, lead to increased trust. So we hope that the lessons learned from this model will provide insight for the early adoption of standards and a roadmap for how recreational data collection can fundamentally improve our understanding of fisheries. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors and thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions if there's time.